Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the Intergenerational Solidarity Series, a podcast brought to you by Civic Voice, Inuka Kenya Nisisi, and The Elephant. I'm Darius Okola here with episode 6, about a national dissent collectively known as the Gen Z Revolution. Joining me to discuss this is a professor of development studies at the Institute for Development Studies at the University of Nairobi, Professor Karuti Kanyinga. Karibu sana, Professor.
Thank you very much, Darius.
So just getting started, the Gen Z revolution across pretty much the continent have criticized what they see as a skewed global development infrastructure. Is that a fair assessment, and how does that play out?
Let's first of all begin by acknowledging that the Gen Z is a new group of young people who have been exposed through technology, through education, and through globalization, interconnectedness that we see everywhere in the world. And therefore, their world viewpoint is not a village mentality. It's not, they don't focus on the world view from a village point of view. They focused on issues from a very global, international perspective because of the context in which they live in. It doesn't matter where they are, whether we are talking about Gen Zs in South Africa, Gen Zs in Kenya here, Gen Zs in DRC. They see their worldview is very different from the worldview of the previous generations. And that's what makes a very big difference in terms of how they see the world evolving. The second thing is that Gen Zs feel actually that they have been failed by the systems in place. They have a very good understanding of what needs to be corrected in order to make our world a better place, in order to make the country they live in a better place to live in. If one were to look at Kenya and the Gen Z revolt that we had in 2024 June, that protest itself was a protest about the failure of leadership to make the country a better country for them to live in. And remember, they were demanding accountability of elected leaders. They were demanding accountability of even churches, accountability of religious leaders, accountability of people who hand public institutions and private institutions. They did not limit their demands to elected leaders alone. They were saying they need a better country. They need a better environment to live in. And the most surprising thing is that many of them would say, if you remember the discussions during the protests, they were not keen to go and work out of the country. Kenya is a better place to work in. They would love to go to those countries and visit them as tourists, having earned their money in Kenya here. What a good, beautiful way of summarizing their view of Kenya. And remember, this same view was reflected in struggles in Nigeria, struggles in Ghana, with people, Gen Zs in those countries also saying, we want to behave the way the Kenyan Gen Zs have behaved. We want to demand accountability of leaders. We want leaders who are responsible. And they want a country governed by rule of law. They want a country where you are judged by the content of your character, not by the nature of who you know or a child of so and so. They were saying and underlining it very clearly, they want a country where everyone is judged on basis of the content of their qualifications and the content of their character. And I thought that was a very strong message that they were sending to leaders almost everywhere. The other thing that I think we need to underline among the Gen Zs here, they started even questioning religion. They started questioning religion and asking the question, God is there, if there is God to them, then that God should be making a world a better place to live in for everyone. And that the God that should be prayed, the people should be praying, is a God that most importantly makes leaders behave as leaders of a people, governed not by self-interest, but by public interest. And that's when they started even questioning religious institutions, churches and church leaders, and telling them that you are off course, because religion that you are telling us to follow is completely alienating people from a better society. I think that we need to really say, and Gen Zs were about a better society. The revolt was a better society, a better country, and I don't think we have seen the end of it.
Yeah, which is interesting, because one of the things that stood out is the struggle in engaging what we'd call the traditional institution of society, academia as currently structured, religion, which is a key social organizing tool in this country. We see that with even the online sentiments around it. And yet, so what are the options? What are the alternatives? How then do we go about finding space for them in traditional institutions, given there's so much patronage frameworks and embedded in there?
Let us be frank with ourselves. The traditional institutions have outlived their usefulness because they are not looking into the future. They are looking into the past and the present. The Gen Zs don't care about the past, where you are coming from. The Gen Zs don't care about the past. They care about how the present will lead them to a better future. And my own view is that actually these traditional institutions we are talking about are losing traction, from the Gen Z of this world. If you look at churches, for the first time, we have had people questioning the way religion is practiced. We have had people questioning religion and the values they see some of the bishops standing for. We have never had instances where people begin questioning religious leaders. We have never had instances where people say, wait a minute, what are we being told to pray? And who is telling us to pray? They have moved ahead and actually shown very clearly that religion as an institution has become very extractive and very extortionist. And that itself should lead bishops and religious leaders to begin questioning how they see themselves and the society they have been preaching for and creating. Because for the first time, the Gen Zs went ahead and said, the churches are being very exploitative. Instead of helping us to make a better country, they are joining those who are exploiting, those who are extracting, and those who are extracting from the general population because of poverty and so on. And if you remember, even the churches themselves were being called to question.
Yeah, true.
Even the churches, there is no single religion that was not being sect, if I can call it that, that was not questioned and its relevance in the society. That's the first thing we need to start acknowledging, that if traditional institutions of socialization don't change and become relevant to the society, they will lose meaning. The numbers of people going to churches these days is of course on decline because of this same reason. People not seeing the relevance of the churches or religious institutions in terms of their day-to-day lives. And we need to start saying loudly that there are questions that we need to give answers to the Gen Zs and the way they post them. And I don't think we have given answers to them. The second institution they questioned in a very big way was education, the type of education that we are giving to people, to students, at different levels of our institutions. They questioned it also because of its irrelevance in present-day society. And finally, they started questioning also the institutions of governance. Why would you elect people to go to parliament and then they alienate themselves from the people who voted for them? Or why would you go to parliament because you have bribed your way into parliament? Why would we have a judiciary that doesn't question, the judiciary that doesn't give justice when it's required to give justice? Why should we have an executive or government that is not responsive to people's needs? These are very hard questions that the Gen Z's revolt was raising. And the most important thing, it is a revolution that I see across Africa. There is Afrobarometer data that shows the youth across the continent are seeing the world very differently from the rest of the population. And they are yearning for a better society. And where they feel that they are not capable of getting that society, they are bolting off. Nigeria is a very good example. The youth in some countries are giving up on those particular systems and saying that if this is what we are working for, to be exploited, extortion is the type of government, they do not want to associate with it.
Yeah, which is interesting because what we are seeing ends as fees must fall. We see similar developments across the Sahel and even within the Horn of Africa. These sort of politics without progress, growth without actual inclusive kind of development. What would you say are the optimal kind of development frameworks that we need now that especially will be responsive to Wanjiku, especially these young people? Because in a sense, they feel both at a national level but also at a global level that the architecture of development is totally not responsive to where they are. And so in a sense, it's causing a certain level of social and economic and even professional stagnation for these young people. What are the kinds of development frameworks we need?
That's a very valid question and a very important question to ask because across Africa, we have seen many governments themselves being happy when they get growth, high levels of growth.
Yeah.
You can have growth without development, and that's what has been happening in many countries. Very high growth levels, but very poor development. And what we are calling development here is people's access to basic services, livelihoods, incomes, well-being must be addressed in order for us to say development is taking place.
True.
We must have a situation where people are food secure, where people's livelihoods are guaranteed, where people do not bother about where they are getting the next meal from, where people are not bothered about how to get treated when they are ill, where people do not bother about how does my child get to education, get access to education. That's what we call totality of development. When development is inclusive, and when citizens themselves are not worried about their livelihoods and their daily needs are taken care of, they take care of themselves. Policies that lead to that are policies that are very productive, that make sure that, policies that are geared towards making all sectors of the economy productive in a manner that will provide incomes, in a manner that will provide opportunities for everyone to have access to basic needs. And access to basic needs cannot be got alone through growth. That growth must be translated into viable development opportunities.
True.
And whatever the government gets in terms of that growth must be invested then in basic services for all. And in countries in sub-Saharan Africa, where a majority of the countries are agrarian or agriculture related, where agriculture is the backbone of the economy for many of them, except in places like Namibia and others, we must say that agricultural production is key to people's livelihoods. And it's simply because through agricultural production, you have got an opportunity to ensure that people's daily needs are taken care of. And people do not have a problem with access to food.
True.
Because that's where the problem is today.
Basics.
That differences in incomes determines whether one will have a meal in a day or not.
Yeah.
We should not, as a country, be having people who struggle to have a daily meal. We are talking about over 40% of Kenyans now living below poverty line. That's a very high number in terms of millions. Those are many, right?
Yeah.
And COVID itself did not make things better, right? And yet we are a country that from independence we have been saying we want to eliminate poverty, ignorance, and disease. Look at Africa today. Life expectancy is lower than in any other continent at all. It's only countries in Northern Africa where life expectancy is above 70%. I think 77% for Morocco, Tunisia, Algeria, probably Egypt. But in our context here, life expectancy is about 64 years. In some countries like Nigeria, it's 50 years. What are we really talking about? When life expectancy of citizens is not above 70 years or even 80 years. Developed world, life expectancy is over 80 in many of the countries. In Japan, it's close to 90. That's what we should be aiming for. Giving people good quality of life, where they do not have to struggle about daily incomes, daily needs, right? And we cannot really say that we are doing well as a continent or even as a country when 60 years after we are talking about millions of people millions of people being food insecure. We cannot talk about independence today when we have having high child mortality rates. It's unacceptable.
True.
It's unacceptable.
Yeah, which is interesting because one of the factors that's blamed for this kind of, if we could call it broadly, underdevelopment is, and it came up a lot during the Gen Z revolution, is illicit financial flows. What happens is you have resources in the country, whether it's mineral resources or strategic location, whatever sort of advantage any particular country has. But then this kind of skewed, trade interest, whether bilateral or multilateral, there's a lot of tax evasion. There's a lot of unaccounted for resource exploitation. And in a sense, how big of a factor is this? How long do you think this narrative will, gain traction within the continent as part of people trying to say we cannot have all these things around that do not benefit these young people?
Let's first of all face the reality. Illicit financial flows have been have been embedded in our nature of politics in the continent. If we talk about 60s and 70s, many countries, many leaders were siphoning out resources into Swiss bank accounts. We know the story very well. That has not changed. We read stories about presidents having bank accounts in Europe, in the Middle East, in America, name it. And remember, if you look at international anti-corruption efforts, they actually spotlight families of presidents and families of prominent people virtually everywhere, having huge amounts of resources, a huge amount of funds in foreign banks. The Panama Papers, for instance. So it's not different. Where is this money coming from? This money is coming from our own countries. This is the money that is meant for investment in basic services. This is money that is meant for investment in education, investment in healthcare services, investment in infrastructure to facilitate growth that can lead up to development. So illicit financial flows by our leaders, by the leaders, this is not by other people, it's by African leaders themselves, because they're in a position to abuse their offices. And they're in a position to abuse offices for self-interest and advancing their self-interest. This is what has made the continent where we are today. We have read stories of West African presidents, like the Cameroonian president who is never in his country, right? He lives in Paris. His children don't even live there. We have got countries that have got a lot of mineral resources. Those resources are being siphoned out to the West for the benefit of the West and by African elites and with the Western elites. And this is what the Gen Zs were saying. This must be brought to an end. And now we have seen it even very openly. President Trump in US has gone very public that he's not going to invest in any country without Americans getting benefits of it. And he's gone and identified minerals in Africa, some of the African countries, as an area you'd like to get into. There are stories around that they may want to have minerals from DRC and then provide security in DRC. What a bad way of looking at relationships between countries. But African countries are there to blame. African leaders are there to blame. African political elites are there to blame. Actually, it's a very frustrating moment we are in as a continent in this millennium.
Yeah, and I mean, speaking of Trump and a sort of this global reorientation going on right now with China on the other side, much of, despite all the Gen Z protests and, all the forms of dissent which have been very impactful, we still do not see a sort of viable and customized development agenda from the continent. Everybody else is shifting, they're making changes, they're realigning their interests and especially national interests. We're not seeing much of that in the continent.
Yeah, let's call a spade a spade.
Yeah.
We do not have a generation of leaders similar to what we had at independence. Leaders who are very visionary and thinking about a continent of 100 years to come. The Kwame Nkrumahs, the Nyereres of this world are not the type of leaders we have on the continent today. A majority of the leaders we have on the continent today only think about re-election. There are very few leaders who have got a vision that will outlive their being in office. And what many of them aim for is not even legacy projects. They don't have a vision to say that this is my country, I need to create wealth for generations to come. They are creating wealth for themselves and with a very short-term focus. We must say this, with a very short-term focus. And I've moved across the continent. I've done a lot of studies in several countries across the continent. The story is the same. A majority of the leaders are looking for just opportunity for re-election. Once you're elected for the first 4 years, you begin a journey within the first year to think about what is it that I do to be re-elected for the next 4 years. And that's the end of the story. And that's the most unfortunate situation the continent is finding itself in. Unfortunately, we do not have even single African leaders that we can say today, this is the leader the African continent can emulate. We have Traore, in Burkina Faso. That he seems to be a leader who is having traction virtually everywhere, but he's not been in office for a long time to say, actually, we can now say that he's having a long-term vision that can have traction for the people of Burkina Faso. But so far, I think the story we are reading from Burkina Faso, we can say he seems to have a better vision than what we have had in West Africa for a long time.
What is the cost of missing out in setting up our agenda as the whole world is reorienting?
We are the losers. Africa is the loser. Countries that are not setting their agenda right with a strong vision and for generations that are here and yet to come are the losers. Because development, if we look at how development takes place through visioning. You have a leader with a vision, and it's not a vision for a short-term period. It's a vision for generations that are yet to come, where we think about 100 years to come, what will be happening in this country. We do not have that kind of visioning at present across the continent. Otherwise, if we had, we would be having dramatic changes on the continent. I would like to give a story about Southeast Asia. The kind of thinking and visioning that we have seen in Southeast Asia is what has made those countries be what they are. They began by investing heavily on food security for their people. began by just only saying they want to invest in research and development in agriculture so that they find ways and means of making their people food secure. And it's that surplus that they would get that they export to different other countries when their people are food secure.
Yeah.
Which country in Africa is food secure today? Then they said, for us to make farmers produce enough for themselves and for surplus, let's make feeder roads accessible everywhere. So everybody, whether we talk about China, Indonesia, Thailand, they invested heavily in feeder roads, rural development.
Yeah.
Then they moved into basic services like basic services, did the same. Made sure that everyone is educated, made sure that everyone has got access to education. And a proper education that is competence-based, so that everyone has got skills to offer the society as they contribute to their own well-being. That's not the story in Africa today. We are losing the agenda, and Africa is the loser in the end.
Yeah.
But even the African Union is doing nothing or very little that we can talk about. It's actually a talking shop that doesn't seem to be providing opportunities for African leaders themselves to think and vision about Africa. There is Vision 2063, but if you ask me how many African countries are buying that into that Vision 2063 and say that this is the continent we want and this is how we are contributing to it, that's a gap that we all need to look at.
So it's interesting because the other side of it is, and just going back a bit, back to Traore. He's a fairly young gentleman, and in a sense, we've seen the gap between the governed and those who are governing widen over the years. So the median age in Kenya is 19.7 years, 20 years, give or take. But the leadership framework is twice, thrice that. There's a sort of both a demographic but also a generational sort of gap in there. But then what we are seeing incidentally is a yearning for this class in the middle to begin to step into leadership. With that glimmer of hope, what are the chances that within the continent we are going to replicate that kind of generational transition into public leadership and service?
Context matters. It's not all countries that can be Burkina Faso. I remember we are talking about countries in the Sahel that have had military coups and that kind of changes. So context matter. But I can say that there is opportunity through the younger people having voice and demanding change and demanding it in a very big way. There is opportunity here for the continent actually to change. My view, reflecting on this, I would say the future of Africa lies in this demand for change by the youth. It does not matter how violently you crush their hopes. It does not matter how violently you dim their hopes, but they are the future, and they will take the future seriously. And my view is that the revolution is yet to come, and it's going to come through these Gen Zs across the continent, because they have a voice. Globalization has taken place. There's greater interconnectedness among them. Technology is working, digital technology is working. No matter how much violence you use against them, they are the people who are going to force change, because they are forcing change even among non-public institutions. They are demanding change from the private sector. They are demanding change from civil society. They are demanding that markets operate effectively. And they are demanding, of course, public officials be held accountable. They are looking at change very holistically, and that's what is beautiful about this. If we look at what is happening in Uganda, you can still see that no matter how autocratic the state is, the youth are still moving up with speed and demanding a better society. It may not come immediately, neither will it come in a radical manner, but I think they are creating opportunities for a better society in a big way than we are seeing. The only problem is that leadership almost everywhere in the continent, whether in Kenya, Uganda, Tanzania, they don't see that coming. They don't see it the way the Gen Zs and the youth generally are seeing it. So they will be caught by storm that they have never seen. In fact, the youth are the new cools that we should be thinking about, because they will force change if we want it or not. We shall give them a better society. And the best thing to do is to govern in an efficient and effective manner, so that it doesn't become disruptive in a big way, but give them hope and deliver a good society to them.
Yeah, which is interesting because previously it was always very clear in the country, a sort of public leadership pipeline, if I could put it that way. You know, it was, you were in the church, you know, with the Okulus and the Muges, you go up. It was in the civil society, you move up. It was partly in academia. A lot of these spaces are no longer, it was student politics to national politics, kind of a pipeline. So in a sense, can we at least tentatively say this sort of Gen Z revolution across the continent is a sort of, one, a political awakening, but also what elements of political type of a program exist or pipeline for these young people who now want to rise in the ranks, but do not want to fall back on the patronage networks?
Let me say that the reason why there was that pathway to leadership that you're talking about was possible is simply because there weren't too many avenues at the time. Again, it was one-party dictatorship, largely, if one can say that. And so the society was not as pluralized as it is today. The opportunities that are available today are many, and this is the opportunity that the Gen Zs are exploiting through digital technology. They're actually saying you can be a leader in whatever space you are in. So do not tolerate bad governance in whatever space you are in, whether it's at school, whether it's in a factory, whether it's in a church. Do not tolerate corruption. Do not tolerate bad leadership. Do not tolerate bad governance. Demand accountability in whatever space we are in. So they are looking at leadership not from the traditional way of looking at leadership, but they are looking at it from a very pluralized sense, where they are saying that everyone should be taken to account. I know stories from several colleagues who tell me that they give Gen Z's work, and in 2 or 3 days' time, they say that I don't want this boss, he's actually messing my mental health. And they walk out and go because they feel that the environment is very toxic, and that's how they describe it. And they don't like what they call gaslighting or being manipulated, right? And everybody is telling a story about these people who do not care about an income, they care about a good environment. And that's how we have got to look at it. We cannot judge Gen Zs or make judgment of them using our traditional lenses. We can only make judgment of them using the current situation and the way they see the future and where they are going. Yeah.
If I would say, what's your crystal ball about the development scenarios for Kenya in light of the current politics and contestations? Where do you think we are likely to go?
Let me begin by saying that Kenyan politics is driven by elite interests. Political elites and their interests is what governs the nature of politics in this country. And this has been so for a very, very long period of time. It has been so for a very long period of time. Elite accommodation, and that's why you see it's the same elites we have. They're in different political parties today, and tomorrow they will be opposing. Today they are opposing each other, and tomorrow they're in the same political party. Right? It's simply because of the nature of elite self-interest that we have. It's not about national interest. It's about self-interest and what's the best way of preserving those self-interests and advancing those self-interests. Having said that, then is to say, one, looking at tomorrow in terms of Kenya, we are going to have the same elites in musical chairs, right? Nothing much will change at the national level if we do not have significant force from especially the youth to have better politics. But one thing which is very certain is that politics is going to change in terms of content. People are going to demand much more accountability, even from the same elites. For instance, now elites cannot organize on ethnic basis anymore. And you can see the older generation is using ethnicity to organize more than anything else. But the youth are telling them, look, I mean, we don't eat ethnicity. It's not about religion, it's not about the tribe. It's about accountability, that's what we want, right? So the older generation, and you can see grouping of new opposition characters who are calling themselves opposition characters, they are assembling as leaders of a tribe, right? And I'm laughing because politics has changed. It's no longer going to be business as usual when you mobilize a tribe, because even the tribe itself knows that you are not accountable to them. Everybody has been used to this game of being mobilized on tribal basis, but you don't produce anything for the tribe itself. So this is being questioned excessively. We are not over it yet, but I believe it's being eroded in a significant manner.
So you've raised Gen Zs, you teach Gen Zs, there are many spaces and contexts within which you interact with them. What kind of conversations are you having with them? Exchanges, what are they saying in terms of where the spaces they exist in, vis-a-vis your wisdom and understanding of this landscape?
Actually, we are talking about a very disillusioned group. Disillusioned group because they usually say the systems that are in place are systems that do not work for them, are systems that are crafted using old lenses, and are systems that are not crafted for the current and the future of the society. I would like to give a very good example. Some of us have been used to teaching people who write on paper, right? And then all of a sudden you find that in almost a whole class, no one is having a paper. Everybody is writing on phone or on a computer, right? That's not a small shift, right? And I'm mentioning that simply because that's the first thing we need to recognize, that we are not living in a world that is driven by conventional practices, and that's the first thing we have got to accept. And then the second thing is that they have not seen systems being put in place to advance interests of everyone. Whatever they see are systems that are put in place to advance what we can call sectional or parochial interests, and yet they want systems that work for everyone. Systems that work for everyone. Remember the conversation that has been in place where some children of the rich during the protests would take care of the children of the poor. Or where some people say that we are going to assist some of my colleagues simply because they're in need of this or that, right? So we have got to say that this is a new context in which we see ourselves in. But I can't say we are talking about a very frustrating group of youth in this country. Very frustrated about the systems that are in place.
And despite this sense of disillusionment, they've moved the needle, so to speak, for society. That's remarkable.
They have moved the needle. Everybody now is worried about the spaces that you occupy, because you want to do things in a transparent manner. You want to do things in a manner that you are accountable to the society. But I must say, some people in public spaces are not aware about this needle that is changing.
Professor Karuti Kanyinga, always a pleasure.
Thank you very much.
You're welcome.